I think it's kind of important that we look at some facts and figures regarding the Paw Sox, don't you? Welcome into My State of Mind. I am Dan York, and as is the case on Friday programs, we either broaden out for debate or an extended conversation on a subject matter, and this particular broadcast was put together last evening, so welcome in. Thank you very much. On Friday nights, we skip the rundown. You can have your own. Do your own rundown. You know, what do you want me to do the rundown all the time? Do your own rundown. Okay. And I get punchy on Thursday afternoons after a long broadcast week. So sometimes I got to bring some real smart people in to help me through, and I have done so tonight. Here's the headline that caught my attention. I think needs a little bit of data analysis. The rise and fall of the Paw Sox attendance at McCoy Stadium. None other than the world famous Ted Nesi on WPR.com. Newsmakers, executive suites. So weather analysis when we get a big storm.
No one gets out of that.
Nobody gets out of that. Nobody gets out of that. Welcome, my friend.
Thanks for having me.
Additionally and importantly tonight, Sam Zurier, councilperson in Providence, is our guest, and he'll be here for segments 2 and 3 to talk about the political role that Providence plays, the planning role, the operational role, the whole kit and caboodle role that it plays, and it's getting to a very second seat
Third,
position
fourth, fifth
in all
seat,
of this,
it feels
don't
like,
you
in
think?
Providence, absolutely. Yeah.
What's your overall take before we get into some of this data as to where we stand on where this thing's going?
I'm more perplexed than ever about this whole deal because, the ask, that initial ask that's now already off the table, the $120 million Freeland, the whole kit and caboodle, was so far off what would seem to be politically palatable in the state that you wonder how much distance are these owners willing to travel to get a deal, because a lot of people have thought Governor Raimondo, because she is close to some of the new owners and they've been her supporters, she's just going to give them what she wants. I don't think her comments sound like her comments to you on this program, her comments elsewhere. She sounds genuinely skeptical, and politically, frankly, I think she knows that doing some big giveaway deal is not popular.
And I think there's some things that are at work there. I think you've got it nailed, and I also think that sometimes the approach is important, right? And I think the Paw Sox have made some cocky mistakes. First of all, buying the team and the next day celebrating its ownership by Dear Johnning Pawtucket may not have been the best thing to do, right? How about, hey, we're really happy to be in baseball in Rhode Island, celebrate it for a couple of weeks, then say, hey, by the way, we need to renovate. And by the way, it's $65 million at McCoy. Maybe we should look at some other, and bring everybody into a conversation about options as opposed to, hey, we bought it. Hey, we're not going to stay here because, boo, it stinks. We like a spot in Providence, and then steamroll and then put up an ask that
Those
made
were
everyone
extraordinary.
I think Gina Raimondo has done two things. I think she's read the tea leaves, which are pretty easy to read. People don't like it very much. Number two, I don't think she's necessarily buying their act. And I think they think the General Assembly is the place where this deal is going to get cut.
I tend to agree.
All right, so anyway,
I think one of the big questions is, how much do people believe they actually have any similar deal? No one doubts they could get a baseball stadium somewhere else, but that's different from getting their ask in Rhode Island or something like that, right? Is Charlie Baker going to give them $120 million, to do it in Worcester or something? I think Gina Raimondo thinks the state has more leverage than maybe some people thought initially.
Well, it's going to be interesting because I actually think that we have no plan B is complete hooey. And I think Springfield, Massachusetts is the option.
With the new casino going up there and everything.
Casino. And casino money will be flowing all over Kingdom Come. It's an ailing city. It's a city I know very well. I worked there for 15 years. It's a city that needs a kick in the pants, that went 0 for 2 on baseball attempts in its recent 20-year history. And it can do the draw. Believe me, there are avid, rabid Red Sox fans from Hartford all the way on up that can meet the demand. So I think that option is Larry Lucchino, sure. Jim Skeffington, would he be heartbroken being the Providence guy, not being able to deliver? For 10 minutes.
Well, it's right? To me, I think you make a very valid case for why Springfield could make sense on its own. The question to me goes back to the financing. Where can they get as much money as they want to get? Springfield, I don't think, can float the bonds or whatever on its own. I think it's unlikely Springfield has the financial capacity, just as Providence can't, as you're going to talk about with Sam Zurier. So that means you have to get the state involved somehow in Massachusetts. Is that something Massachusetts wants to do?
I bet you. Let me tell you something. The political dynamics of west of 495, the chronic complaint from people in western Massachusetts is that we get nothing from Boston. This would be an easy, tangible give. And so I think the plan B is out there. I think it's still a deep plan B, but I think it's real for these guys, and I think they'll pull the plug. Yet, what's interesting is it seems that they have reorganized, but their marketing of it is horrendous. One comment by a spokesperson, why wouldn't you, if you've done so poorly with the general public, why wouldn't you call a major press conference to say, you know what, we got a little cocky. Go back to ground zero. Because Nick Mattiello is telling his caucus members to view this thing as if there was no deal on the table. That's very hard to do.
Absolutely.
Unless the Paul Sox say there's no deal on the table.
And people now know what the starting request was. And by the way, Jim Skevin, they may be saying, he said to me directly in that press conference, this is not some pie-in-the-sky negotiating ploy. This is what we need and really want. Well, it's already off the table after a couple weeks, so what are we supposed to believe as Rhode Islanders? So it's a very interesting dynamic. And Nick Mattiello has seemed seems enthusiastic. The most of the ruling triumvirate of him, Raimondo, and Paiva, he certainly seems the most interested in doing a deal.
And I don't think that makes him a bad guy or wrong, but I think he'll be more amenable, and has already leaked in his commentary a sentiment, hinted at a sentiment that says, hey, subsidies in this program. Stop thinking that there's going to be no subsidy. But you put a piece together on the data. Walk me through, which camera? There. Walk me through the data, if we can, Jess. What is this thing?
All right, so this is in the economic impact study that the Paw Sox put together, the new owners, and they're trying to build their case for why attendance isn't what it could be at Pawtucket, and they need to move on. Now, what's interesting here is you see the blue is the Pacific Coast League, the gray is the International League, what the Paw Sox are part of, the red is the Pawtucket Red Sox themselves. And you're looking over the last decade average attendance at a game. It was very high in 05, and most people, assuming it makes sense to me, that's a bump off the 04 historic Boston Red Sox World Series victory, baseball excitement, etc. It falls back, but it's still slightly higher than the average for their league. And there was a separate thing in this same study saying Pawtucket captures one of the highest percentages of local population in its attendance. So this to me said the Paw Sox, while they're nowhere near those really high numbers you see back in 05, 06, they're still doing relatively well for a minor league ballpark right now compared with their peers. And
the next segment, of course, there's McCoy.
Beautiful.
The next, and it is gorgeous. I mean, this notion that it's kind of a piece of garbage has been, I think, overstated. Comparably, I guess, with other city stadiums, whatever. But the next attendance figure is self-explanatory.
Total annual Paw Sox attendance at McCoy Stadium each year since 1990. Now, the biggest bump, I think the most dramatic one you see there, is 98 to 99. That, of course, is when they renovated McCoy, which probably drove a lot of people. Then you have those big baseball years in the years after that, particularly 04, 05 with the first World Series victory. And then you see it's been dwindling downward on a downward path. I mean, this last season, 2014, was the lowest since they renovated McCoy Stadium in 1999. I don't think we know exactly why that's happening. I've heard arguments from, the Red Sox in Boston aren't that good, with the exception of 2013. McCoy's getting older, as Skeffington says. The economy's been terrible in Rhode Island. There's a lot of reasons that could happen.
I think it's all three. And the final is an interesting thing here.
This is not mine. This is a fellow.
It looks like my kid's third grade art program.
Or some kind of abstract thing. So this is Alex, and I apologize if I say his name wrong, Grabby. He's an interesting fellow on Twitter. He'll throw things out there. He put this data together. The dark black is what people should focus on. That is Pawtucket Red Sox attendance. And what you see there is a downward drift. This is compared with the other teams in that league. His point was he was trying to test the idea that if you build a new stadium, your attendance goes up. He found 3 of the 4 teams that did recently, it did go up, but the 4th it did not. And so it's not necessarily foolproof that the Providence Stadium gets built and they see higher attendance.
And here is going to be an interesting conversation because I think there's no doubt that they're looking at a different market. He's going to leave some McCoy or Skeffington, Lucchino, they are going to leave some habitual McCoy fans behind.
Absolutely.
And so the Providence thing, he sees a new niche market or a downtown market or a more sophisticated market, perhaps a higher ticket paying market, even though they keep saying no, no, no. Give me a quick thought on the politics of Providence before we bring the councilman on to talk about it.
I think like Port Providence and a lot of these things, it's people like Councilman Zurier, yelling a bit to try to get some attention, say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, what's this going to do to the city, and are you going to take care of us? I mean, Round is a city-state in the end, and Providence has deep financial problems, and to do a big deal with a tax treaty on land that, if it gets offset and everything, potentially doesn't get in there, I don't know, but I think there's no doubt Governor Raimondo, Speaker Mattiello are driving the train on this, and it's Providence elected leaders' job to try to
well, I
nose
don't
themselves
think you
into
want
the
to leave
room.
the Providence City Council and the mayor himself as a dangling participle, because that can bite you in the rear end at the end.
Yeah, though
make a deal that
getting the stadium open in 17 or 18 is good for the re-elections of Governor Raimondo and Jorge Lorza potentially if they're at the ribbon cutting and such.
Thanks for the data.
No problem, sir.
Councilman Zurier, when we come back.
This is a different issue. We're not issuing bonds. This is a company that's already been in Rhode Island for 50 years. This is one of 30 AAA franchises across the country. They're affiliated with the Boston Red Sox. What fear do you have that they're not going to be around in the next 10, 20, 30, or 100 years? They'll be here. It's just a different analysis, and we have to look at it for what it is.
Well, I think what the speaker is saying there is it's not 38 studios to a question. But you know what? It's a big deal, and people are not that happy about how it is positioned quite yet. Sam Zurier is a councilman in Providence on the east side. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
You've been one of the lead people saying, hey, we're here. Now, program note, we recorded this Thursday afternoon, and tonight, meaning last night, you have a meeting at the council, and on the agenda is a, hey, we're here, right? You were going to try to get a resolution passed.
That's correct. We have a resolution to invite the ownership to come discuss their proposal with the Providence City Council.
You and I talked about this on the radio the other day, that you have to put a resolution together asking for formal discussions / negotiations with the Paw Sox. It should give people pause.
Well, certainly, had they chosen to come meet with us, they would have been welcome. And if it takes an invitation to bring them in, I hope we agree to do that.
I don't think it's a subtle thing that you have to pass a resolution to ask them to formally come in. There's something, as Ted and I were talking about, there's something wrong with this picture. The move to Providence, and again, I'm bullish on the idea if it works for everybody. I think. Are you too? By the way, you're not philosophically opposed to the stadium, are you?
I think it could work under the right terms, which
Okay.
are different from what we've heard.
Quality of life issues for East Siders walking down to the ballpark at all, as it's been kind of prescribed to us. Never mind everybody else. But this is a confusing mosaic right now with that 195 redevelopment land. We have a commission that is the function of a state piece of legislation that incorporates both the city's and the state's needs on it. Yet, for any development at 195, there's not a good rate card template right now for taxation in the city of Providence that has to be accomplished by the person who wants to come in and gets approved by the 195 commission. In other words, if I want to build on 195, I got to pass the commission's muster that it fits whatever their vision is, and then I got to go to the city of Providence and make a deal for taxation, and that is right now on a deal-by-deal basis as opposed to something I could shop for, right?
Right, although if someone wanted to pay full taxes, then certainly they would be welcome and they wouldn't need a deal from us.
Yeah, but nobody wants to do that.
That's the
because
problem.
because in enterprise zones or commercial zones or development zones, it's almost American business culture that there'll be something special offered because everyone is starving for the activity and economy that is going to be brought to the area.
You're right, and we've recognized that Providence has a very high commercial tax rate, and we've frozen it for the last 3 years, but it's still too high, and it is a barrier to development in our city.
So we got a couple of conversations going on here. One, getting Providence synergized up with the 195 mission, which now is being reevaluated by the new Raimondo administration with a $150,000 consultation about making sure we got the right overall plan for the 20-plus acres.
Yes.
And if the baseball stadium fits, then we're going to spend another $1.50 getting a consultation. Now, the speaker's got his own consultant. Are you guys going to hire your own consultant? Mayor Lorza and the council going to make that part of the agenda?
I don't believe that's happening. Certainly, I'm not aware of any request to the city council to spend money on that. I've been trying to learn what I can on my own, but I also think there's some cooperation between the city leaders and the state leaders to share information that the state is developing.
All right, so let me ask you this before we get into the middle of the sandwich. I think we've already done that. What's your biggest concern about this whole thing?
Well, my constituents have a wide range of concerns, including siting. My own concern is that right now, this could have impose a burden on the city, and it's not necessarily the best option we have in terms of developing the city and improving our fiscal situation.
Burden defined as what?
This would, in addition to affecting the development of the rest of the I-195 parcel, this would be a major claim on city services. And if they don't pay taxes, frankly, it's going to set a bad precedent for other development. For instance, Johnson & Wales came, they developed, and they reached an agreement with us to pay in lieu of taxes. What will Johnson & Wales say if we give the Pawtucket Red Sox a complete break on their taxes? They'll feel that they shouldn't have done work with us.
Yeah, it's interesting. For some reason, the sports economy thinkers keep thinking that stadiums ought to be on its own exempt playing field.
I'll give you one data point. I was curious, so I looked up the city of Boston tax rolls, and 24 Yawkey Way is on the tax rolls for $82 million, and they pay $2.4 million of tax. So,
is that commensurate with the tax rate?
Yes, their rate is around $30, which is lower than ours. And their stadium is probably worth quite a bit more than $80 million. But the point is that the Boston Red Sox say, even though we're giving all these wonderful benefits to Boston, we understand that we're supposed to pay taxes to the city to help the city run and to pay the cost of providing services to us.
So that's a good, I'm glad I had not done that research. So they're paying taxes at Fenway and they don't want to pay taxes here.
That's how I would view it. I'd say why?
Well, you need a meeting with these guys to ask the question, don't you?
I think that would be a great topic for discussion.
That's part of the effort with the resolution. When we come back, we'll talk about, the overall city economy, how it's doing, how this impacts it, and more. Stay with us. There's the new mayor, of course, either before or after his budget address, which is always interesting. We'll talk about that in a second. With Sam Zurier, city councilman from Providence, who has at least said, yo, can we get a resolution that calls for these guys from the Paw Sox to come in and talk to us? I was saying to Ted Nesi at the top of the show, Sam, that this might be, you might be helping. It feels like what's the movie with Tom Cruise? He plays the player agent. What is the? Jerry Maguire. Thank you, Jess. Yeah. Where he's saying to his client, help me help you. Help me help you, because if you don't point out to these guys better get into Providence City Hall real quick, they could do a statewide deal legislatively and the like, and then a not so happy city council says at the end, right? Wouldn't you want to be part of this commensurate with the process?
Well, frankly,
and that would help them.
Well, it may, but I'm frankly worried about something I call the squeeze play, which is where they get all the other approvals, they bring it to Providence, and they say, are you in Providence going to do what's required, or are you going to be responsible for losing the Paw Sox? That's why I want us to be in the conversation sooner.
You remind me that your op-ed piece was full of those baseball metaphors, and so I get what you're saying. Well, isn't Jorge Elorza and his chief of staff, or his chief executive, or CEO, or COO, or what are we calling
Chief Operating
Mr.
Officer.
Smiley, Brett Smiley? He's part of a small group that came out of Commerce RI that's kind of watching and talking about this. Do you know if the city has a front seat at the table with all of this stuff going and they're just being quiet about it?
Well, actually, I want to thank you for informing me about Brett's role, because after I learned that from you, I spoke with him and learned that they are involved in discussions with the state as part of the negotiations.
Okay. but quietly, and not very formally, and not very publicly.
Yes.
Not sure whether that's a good or a bad thing.
Well, my concern is that the ownership kind of put down a marker, nothing for Providence. And I wanted to make sure that people understood there were some people in Providence who didn't see that as a good starting point.
Let's not kid ourselves. Providence police will have to be around the stadium. Ambulances will be called.
Yeah, I mean,
The fire worries occur. I mean, there are public services that are going to be tapped in the city of Providence and have to be respected, correct?
absolutely.
This is quite the dynamic. You're worried that at the end, they just stare you down and say, you have got to be kidding me. This deal's done and you're going to stand in the way, and start to demonize those who do. What do you think the mayor's pulse is on this? Will he get caught in a demonized position with his pants down, or will the council help me with that?
Yes, this is above my pay grade. I mean, the mayor is a very capable person. I know he wants what's best for the city. I just worry that these folks might try to railroad us in one manner or another. And I think I want to, as Jerry McGuire, to help out by getting us into the discussion before some deal is cut.
Does the Providence City Council have a respect problem in general? I mean, one of the things that you and I have talked about in the past is that, Council President Aponte, who I know you did not support, he's got $40,000 worth of fines with the Board of Elections. And while I think he's a complicated guy, because he's impressed me, he's very congenial and he's easy to understand and talk with, he also can't count. He can't get his paperwork in order. How does the city of Providence get taken seriously by big-time investors, whether it's the Paw Sox or Acme Products, when you got this kind of sloppiness in city government?
Well, we had a leadership election. It was a free and fair election. We elected a city council president, and now all of us have to work together for what's best for the city. And I personally have decided, as far as my own time goes, I'm not going to be productive for my constituents or the city by fighting the battles that have already been decided.
Well, I don't know that those things aren't ongoing. You can always revisit. I know it's not necessarily charter provided, but I think those things ought to be paid attention to. I think there's too much, don't worry about it, type of stuff that goes on in government, period. The city as well. All right, we got a minute or so. What should people be looking for from Providence city government in general regarding this entire project?
I hope that the city of Providence will listen to its residents, and we're having a community meeting of our own, and find out what we think about having the Paw Sox. And then once we know what's best for the city of Providence, I hope we make decisions consistent with that interest.
Can you see it making the kind of timetable that reportedly the Paw Sox feel so strongly about, meaning the end of June for a General Assembly session, so they can hit a shovel into the ground come fall and be ready up in 2017 or 18 at the latest?
Well, I think that the city council's review is going to take more than a month. That much I can say for sure. And we don't meet in August. I also heard the governor say that she doesn't think that the June timetable is binding, and she thinks if they need more time.
Of course it's not binding. I think we can say, sorry guys, we didn't make it. Matty L was talking about, hinted about, a summer session. Can you imagine that, a special summer session of the General Assembly for this deal? What about you guys? Would you do a special session? You'd have to if you get the political pressure, right?
We have had meetings on either side of August in connection with important developments, and if that's what it takes, to get a deal or get a development that's good for the city of Providence, people will come in from their vacations to do that.
All right, we'll follow the bouncing ball. Appreciate your time.
Thank
Sam Zurier, Councilman in Providence. One more thing and we come back to it. We always want to know what you think. Your state of mind is important to us. You call us, leave us a voicemail, email, tweet, Facebook post, and your continuing conversation about the Providence part of the Paw Sox deal is important. We'll see you. Have a great weekend. Yeah.